I would never have thought of my mother-in-law, Ruth, as a civil rights activist. She was a conservative, church-going, mother of six, married to an Air Force officer. And she was smart, and she was kind, and she was devoted to her family. This was the 50s, so think about Harriet Nelson from Ozzie and Harriet, or June Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver. That was Ruth. And this was 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, because her husband Joe was an Air Force officer, they'd been deployed and they'd moved many, many times. So they'd spent a year in El Paso, a year in Biloxi, a year in Salt Lake City, and now they were in Montgomery, Alabama. But the times, as they say, were a-changing. So when they moved to Montgomery, Ruth, a believer in education, she immediately enrolled her three oldest children in the local elementary school, Katoma Elementary School. And she joined the PTA because that's what women did back in the 50s. They baked cookies, they supervised piano lessons, and they joined the PTA. There were monthly meetings, and Ruth was always there in the school cafeteria. There was always an agenda, and the agendas were predictable. There were the appreciation for the teachers and the lunchroom personnel. There were the fundraisers that usually involved cookie sales or magazine subscription sales. It was the refurbishment of the playground equipment, the preparations for the sixth grade promotion. Very predictable. But something else was on the agenda that particular meeting, and it was because of the news, the local and national news. In Montgomery, at that time, the news was all about the bus boycott and Rosa Parks. That was local news, but it was also national news, along with school desegregation, Governor Wallace, Martin Luther King Jr. Now, up until then, the National PTA Board had always left the membership criteria to the local chapters. They could do whatever they wanted with that. But now with this news, the board of directors of the National PTA decided that they needed to have all of the local chapters agree to something specific, and that was full integration of all PTAs. So they sent down the word, put it to a vote for all local chapters for ratification, and that's what was on the agenda. Now, you might have thought that that would be a cause of much controversy, but it really wasn't. In Alabama, in Montgomery, people believed in traditions, and their tradition was a tradition of segregation. So when the PTA meeting started, they quickly went through all of the regular things, the bake sales and the appreciation and the promotions, and then they came to the decision about whether or not to adopt the national PTA requirement. So the chairwoman of the PTA, she said, we'll have a standing vote, and we'll begin with those who wish to keep to our own traditions and reject the national PTA requirement. All who are in favor of rejecting the national PTA requirement, please stand. There was a shuffle of chairs, a murmur of voices, and if you'd been in that cafeteria, it would have looked to you like all of those people were standing. But according to Robert's Rules of Order, she had to ask for the opposing vote as well. So she said, all who are in favor of adopting this requirement, now stand. There was not a great murmur of voices. There was not a great shuffling of chairs, but there was a small gasp because Ruth McPhie was standing and one other woman, just the two of them in that auditorium filled with PTA members. Of course, the amendment was rejected. And if it meant secession from the national PTA, well, that was not a big deal. I mean, it's not like Alabama had never seceded from anything before, right? But that's how my mother-in-law, Ruth McPhie, became known in her town as a civil rights activist. And that's also how the parent teacher organization in Katoma Elementary School was no longer the PTA, but became known as the PTO.